Ryan Truschel with your tropical update for September 6th. The tropics are quieter today following Hurricane Hermine's direct strike on northern Florida with no immediate threats. DEFCON is lowered across the board. Well, after an unprecedented 11-year stretch with no hurricane landfalls in the state of Florida, Hermine brought that streak to an end last week. Making landfall with maximum sustained winds of 80 miles an hour, Hurricane Hermine also brought sustained winds of around 50 miles an hour and gusts to 65 to Tallahassee, knocking out power to Weather Tiger World Headquarters for 4 sweaty days. But we're back up now, and currently Hermine is winding down east of New Jersey as an extratropical cyclone, expected to dissipate within 2 days as it moves northeast. Look for 30 to 40 mile an hour winds and high seas to continue in the northeast through midweek. The obvious question is whether Hermine's landfall indicates more threats in the second half of the season, so here's a brief update to Weather Tiger's seasonal forecast. Our August update called for near to slightly below average levels of both overall and U.S. landfall activity, with in particular reduced risk of major hurricane landfalls. To take a victory lap, the August outlook also specifically highlighted the Florida Gulf Coast as a region at elevated risk for hurricane landfall this year, and honestly, being right may be worth a 4-day power outage. Running our proprietary Tiger Tracks model for early September conditions, in general we see a slight uptick in expected activity over the August forecast, but the forecast remains for a near to slightly below average 2016 hurricane season overall. Look for seasonal activity of 90 to 95% of average storm energy in the Atlantic, with U.S. landfall energy of 75 to 80% of the 1886 to 2015 average. From today, the Weather Tiger forecasts chances of at least one additional tropical storm, hurricane, and major hurricane landfall in the U.S. are about 80%, 60%, and 20% respectively. It's worth saying here that in an average year, there are 2 hurricane landfalls somewhere in the United States, so another hurricane landfall this year would still be a very normal outcome. It also bears noting that the forecast of major hurricane landfall risks continue to be well below average and will really tail off if we make it through September unscathed. Regionally, there is no change from August, as it continues to be the Gulf Coast, and especially the Florida Gulf Coast, at the greatest landfall risks relative to long-term averages this year. Turning to the current state of affairs, there are a couple areas of interest this week, in this peak week of hurricane season, but no immediate threats to the U.S. coastline. Invest 92L in the Central Caribbean near Hispaniola is showing no signs of organization and is unlikely to develop this week as it continues generally west towards an axis of strong shear. A few GFS ensemble members are showing weak organization in the Western Gulf early next week, but there is only a 10 to 15% chance of that scenario occurring in my opinion. The East Atlantic is also active, with a wave just emerging off the African coast having roughly a 75% chance of development this week. However, any storm will likely return north into the Central Atlantic along 60 west in just over a week, as supported by all global models. There is also perhaps a 25% chance of development early next week from the next wave to roll off Africa over the weekend. So no immediate sequels to Hermine in the works, but also no cause to let your guard down with half of the season still ahead. Now you know what's happening in the tropics. Keep watching the skies.